Um, this morning, I wanted to kind of give an introduction, and the next, apart from special occasions, the next maybe 4 or 5 months, we're going to be looking in the Gospel of John. But this is kind of a strange introduction in a sense, but as we launch off this kind of series in the Gospel of John, I'm going to look in the book of Matthew. And the reason being is that there's a passage that's mirrored both in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of John. But I wanted to look at the Gospel in Matthew a little bit more. It's a little bit more detailed, but also because we're going to be coming to and discussing the passage in the book of John later on. But before we kind of jump into this introduction, what I wanted to give you is just a little bit of background about the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John was written by one of the disciples, but it was written by a disciple that calls himself throughout the Gospel the one that Jesus loved, the one whom Jesus loved. And in one sense, if you look at it and take it in the wrong perspective, you can say that he's very conceited or he's very full of himself to think that he's the one that Jesus loved. But he never says he's the one that Jesus loved more than anyone else. But what he's basically saying is my identity and who I am and all that I am in every way is really bound up in this identity of having been loved by Jesus Christ, of continually being loved by Jesus Christ. And so to him, that's his most important truth about who he is. And so that's kind of an idea of the author of the Gospel of John, and I think this is really important for us to understand. But as we go through the Gospel of John, what you find is John talks a lot about encounters with Jesus and how it transforms people. You'll see throughout the 21 chapters in the Gospel of John, people who interact with Jesus, who come to kind of this fork in the road where they kind of have to make a decision to follow more after Jesus or maybe to walk away or to change something in their life, and the encounter and how their encounters with Jesus transform them. The Gospel of John is about, first and foremost, Jesus Christ. But it is about the relationships he has with people and how he impacts people. And in that sense, I want us to kind of go through that for a while, just kind of looking at it, because I think a lot of us, we've maybe gone to church for a while, or we regularly attend, or we've had a relationship or walked with Christ for many years, some of us longer than others. But somewhere along the line, it's just kind of something that we've taken for granted. And it's important for us to kind of renew our sense of adventure, our sense of anticipation, our sense of passion in our walk, in our relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's kind of what I want to do, not only for all of you, but for myself as well. And to begin this, I want to kind of take a look at a passage that's in John 6, but also mirrored and fleshed out a little bit more in Matthew 14. I'm going to just give you a short synopsis and summary of it, and then I'm going to read Matthew 14 together with you. And so the background that we have is that, the evening comes and the disciples and Jesus has been ministering to all these huge crowds. And his disciples go down and get in the boat, and then they begin to cross the Sea of Capernaum. But Jesus, he goes away and he goes and prays for the evening. And then later on, way deep in the middle of the night, after the disciples have already departed and are partly across the Sea of Capernaum, he comes to them and he walks to them on the water. And this is the encounter that the disciples have. They're already following him. They've already seen him do miracles. They've already seen him as something much more than a prophet, a teacher, just a normal, everyday human being. They see there's something there, that they're beginning to have inklings that he might be the Messiah, or whatever that means to them in their minds. That he's much bigger than they ever imagined, that they're a part of something amazing, life-changing, history-changing. And this is their encounter with Jesus Christ. Now, one of the things that I know is that sometimes in our life as Christians, and sometimes in our life, just in our day-to-day life as students, as people who go to work Monday through Friday, and then we come to church on Sunday, and we run our errands on Saturday, we take care of our kids, we do our homework, we go to school, we go to our classes, we go through finals, we go through the stress of everyday living, and we go through our routines. And it's amazing to me because every time I kind of see a lot of you back on Sunday, sometimes during the middle of the week, but mostly on Sunday, it's amazing that 1/52nd of our year has kind of gone by. Another month goes by, another year goes by, and it just kind of floods through. And sometimes we just kind of feel like it just passes by, like turning a page, and nothing really changes. It's just time passes. But I think there's moments in our life that we can miss if we're not ready. And their moments are, there's all kinds of cliches. They're, change points. They're forks in the road. They're decision points. But I believe those come all into all of our lives. And all of us have them. Sometimes they're close together. Sometimes they're far apart. Sometimes there's major life changes that are thrown upon you that have nothing to do with the choices that you made. And then there's other things that have to do with choices that you've made about where to go to school, about getting married, about taking a different job, or moving to a different area, whatever those things might be. But then there's also these opportunities that come unexpectedly, where now you have a choice to make. And what I find is that the majority of people, when they come to these major choices, and this is just from my own anecdotal experience and evidence in my life and talking with people, is that a lot of us tend to, myself included, stay the course. We get in these paths, and it takes a lot for us to kind of move out of it. It's easy, it's the safer road, it's the more comfortable place for us to be in. But it takes something a little bit different, maybe out of the ordinary, or some crisis, or some moment of enlightenment, or something that causes us to have enough momentum, strength, force of will, whatever you want to call it, to start and embark on something that we hadn't anticipated. That's a new direction. But I believe that in our lives, when those moments come, and especially with Jesus, when he's saying, follow me into new adventures, into new places, we need to be prepared and ready. And I think a lot of us get stuck in the mundane, get stuck in kind of boredom or in these kind of places that are... There's nothing wrong with routine, mundane things because that's the way we live most of our lives. But there is a problem when we are so bored, we're just waiting for the days and weeks to pass. We're only living for vacations, or we're living only in the future for some anticipated joyful event. That's not the way it ought to be. And so here in Matthew 14, it's fleshed out a little bit, but the reason I chose this is because I think it gives us a little bit fuller understanding of this encounter, this kind of miraculous encounter that the disciples have with their Lord Jesus. It says in verse 22, immediately, and this is he, Jesus, he made the disciples get in the boat, go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So he sends all the crowd off. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, beaten by the waves. It had a hard time going, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, probably between 3 and 6 a.m. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? My intention this morning is not to exegete and unpack everything about this passage, but I do want to give you guys maybe a little bit of impetus about how we can take some steps of faith in the adventure that Jesus calls to in our life following after him. And the very first thing that I find in this passage is this: even though the disciples have been with him a little bit of time now, they've seen miraculous things through Jesus, they're still not expecting the extraordinary, the miraculous, the supernatural. Now, sometimes supernatural, miraculous things happen and we don't identify it very well. We actually give it reasoning from the world when maybe it is actually God. And maybe sometimes we can't fully know, but there are times when God breaks in and we are so dull in our mind that we don't see it. And in order for us to be empowered to make that right decision, to pursue this life that continues to have passion and follow after God in a very extraordinary way, we need to expect the extraordinary. It says Jesus comes to them, to the disciples, walking on the sea. I mean, he intended to do this all along, I believe, because why would he send the boat across unless he had his own boat already? He knew that when they were going across, there's no other way for him to go unless he wanted to go the roundabout way and walk all the way around the shore, all the way around the land. And, he would never catch up with his disciples who were going across by boat. He already intended this. Do we expect extraordinary, miraculous things to happen in our walk with Jesus, in our relationship with Jesus? I think we pay lip service to it. I think we say, yes, I do. But then we're surprised and caught off guard if anything even remotely touching the extraordinary or miraculous happens in our life. We're surprised. The disciples were surprised. They'd seen Jesus multiply bread and fish to feed the masses. They'd seen him turn water into wine at the wedding in Cana, and yet they're surprised when Jesus walks on the water. Are we? Do we pray for people to be healed in our family when they're sick or when they're ill, and then when it actually might happen or does happen, are we surprised? If Jesus is the God who created in the beginning, as John chapter 1 says, all the heavens and all the earth, if he's the one that always was, then why are we surprised? It may not happen all the time as we anticipate or as we desire, but we should never be surprised at what God does. Any miracles that happen. Most of you are way too young to remember this, but I think it's kind of an interesting movie. If you're ever bored and you have Netflix, or I don't know what online thing has it, but there was a movie a number of years ago, a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, I think more like 20, maybe 25 years ago, with Steve Martin in it. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a comedian from the older days, and now I guess he plays all the old man roles, but he was quite popular in the day, and there was a movie called Leap of Faith. I think it was like in the early 90s, maybe 92, 93, something like that. And he portrayed a faith healer that would go around from small town to small town, having these tent revivals and calling people out and telling them and then healing them. And they would give offering and money, and that was kind of... But he was a con man. The movie made it clear from me he didn't believe in all these kind of things. And maybe at one point he did have faith, but it's all a sham. And there were some people that would work with him that were all con artists that would go out and find out about these people's history so that when he would stand up in front of these tent meetings, he would identify people. And they actually used high-tech computer for them, high-tech computer. And he had an earbud and would tell them, that gentleman sitting in the third row, fourth from the right, this is his situation. And he would say, I feel like God's telling me. And then he would say that, and they would be all amazed, and all the people would be kind of taken in by this. And I think sometimes for us, we pay lip service, and we're all like saying, yeah, God, I believe in extraordinary. I believe that you're the God who created all the universe and all these miraculous things. But sometimes we almost have to kind of prove it by forcing ourselves to believe those things, and we don't expect much. But the twist in this movie is that towards the end, that there's this woman in that town who's a single mom who has a crippled son, and that town in this Midwest is basically a farming community, and they're going through a severe drought like what we were having, and there was no rain in sight. And so they were asking for these things, for this woman's son to be healed. That's what the woman's prayer was, and the request was from God. And for the whole town, this general request of the drought being lifted so that they could, live and their economy could function. And he knows nothing's going to happen. He just wants to sham as much money and as much stuff as he can and leave. But the twist in the movie is that he begins to question because that woman, her son, who's crippled, is healed. And towards the end, the drought is lifted and water falls. And it kind of leaves at the end like that. What's going on? I think some of us, we've lost the sense of wonder, anticipation, desire of those things. How do we make difficult decisions in the fork in the road? How do we break out of the rut? How do we follow after Jesus more passionately? We have to be ready and expecting extraordinary things. We have to expect that God will work in some extraordinary ways. Maybe not every day, every moment, but when it does happen, we shouldn't be caught by surprise. The second thing that I want to point out to you from this passage is that we have to kind of overcome the fear of the unknown. It's interesting because disciples have never, ever in all their days of fishing, of being by the lake, seen anyone walk on water. Neither have I. None of you have either. And so when they see him, in verse 26, it says, when they saw him walking on the water, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." So all the superstitious mindset of the day comes flooding back in, and everything that they've been learning from Jesus goes pushed out, and they go back to their original ways because this is unknown, this is uncharted territory, and they become afraid, and they go back into their old ways. That's what I think is being pointed out here, and I think for a lot of us, that's what happens. What happens when something all of a sudden that happens that causes you to fear, that's unknown, you don't know what's going to happen, then you kind of tend to pick the safest route, the safest road. I think for Christians who believe in Jesus Christ, what Jesus says to them is what he says to us. He says in verse 27, Jesus spoke to them saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." He doesn't dispel the storm. He doesn't, change the lighting to make it bright so that they can see him more clearly or whatnot, or go about explaining why he's able to walk on water because he's the Son of God. He just says, "It's me. It's me. Don't be afraid." And I think that's God's answer to a lot of us when we're in situations that are unknown or that cause fear in our hearts. Maybe decisions that we have to make and we're like, I don't have all the data. I don't have all the things to make a wise decision in this, but I need to make a decision. What do I do? And say, well, God, I'm going to trust that you're with me. I'm going to make the best faithful decision that I can. And then I'm going to just step out. I think a lot of us, we get paralyzed by fear. We really do. And the amazing thing is that when we begin to step out, it becomes actually easier. And with Jesus, his only reassurance is not everything will be right. He doesn't say that. Not everything's going to turn out for the best. He doesn't say that here necessarily, but what he says is, I'm with you. Be courageous. He doesn't even say, don't be afraid, exactly those words, but he says, take heart. In other words, be bold. I'm with you. I think Christians who follow after Jesus, who know that he's on their side, should be the most bold. I remember this story that my seminary professor told me, but he was probably like in his late 60s at the time, and he and his wife, they have grandchildren. He's a grandfather to the figure. I was probably like in my late 20s, early 30s at the time. And I remember the story that he told me, and we were like shocked because he started out with this in his lecture, and he said, my wife got held up at gunpoint yesterday. And we're like, okay. And he just delighted in telling us the story because she was sitting there in the car with her window down, and this guy stuck a gun into the car and said, give me your purse, lady, give me everything. She said, I don't have any money. She said, I know you want it. Give me your money. She said, I don't have any. She said, I'm about to shoot you, lady. Give me your money. Give me your stuff. He's like, I don't have any, and honestly, I'm not afraid, because if you shoot me and I die, I'm going to go to heaven. And she's like, and he's like, frustrated, and he's like, ah, and then he just kind of ran off. I'm not saying that should be your response when someone sticks you up at gunpoint, okay? And I don't think she was just being foolishly courageous, but basically, she knows Jesus Christ. She knows whom she believes in. And as a result, she had a boldness about her. Male, you can shoot. I mean, I think she kind of didn't want to give him her purse. And I think she basically told her husband, I was thinking about it. I gotta go get a new license, new credit cards, and all these kinds of things. And I like that purse, or whatever it was. I can't remember, it was like many years ago. But I remember thinking about that. I thought, you know what? That's the boldness that we have in Christ. It's like what the Bible says, what can man do to me? He can send me to my Father a little sooner. That's what he can do. If the God of all the universe is with me, and then we have impetuous Peter who sees Jesus. He says, after Jesus says, take heart, it is I, don't be afraid. And he goes one step further. And Peter says, hey, Lord, if it really is you, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. I don't know if a lot of us do this, but Peter, and I don't think God minds this to a certain extent, says, Lord, if this is you breaking into my life, wanting me to do this, then give me a clear sign, and then I'll step out. And so Jesus says, okay, come. And what does Peter do? He steps out. Not only are we supposed to expect the extraordinary, not only should we not fear the unknown because God is with us, Christ is with us, we need to learn how to engage in stepping out, one step at a time, in faith. And here in faith, I'm not talking about blind faith. We never talk about blind faith in the Bible. God never intends you just to put your reason and your logic and everything, just blindly step. That's not what he's talking about. He's saying, if you see me and if you know me, what do you have more faith in? Here's Jesus standing on the water. Do you have faith in God who created all the physics in all the world, or do you have more faith in physics and law and the natural order of things? No, you have more faith in the one who created everything. And, one of my favorite books of all time series is the Narnia series. And lately, Catherine and I enjoyed it when she was younger, and she read it again on her own. And I think it's something that you can read again and again and again. And for those of you who haven't read it, you should read it. Not just watch the movies that came out more recently. And so lately, I've been reading with my younger daughter, Elizabeth, and she's actually not a big reader, but she likes the Chronicles of Narnia. And so we've been reading what was published first, but supposedly chronologically comes second, but The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And in it, there's this amazing passage that I think it would be good for us to take to heart. I'm not going to read it verbatim because it's a little lengthy, but I want you to kind of understand. So the way that this book works, the way that this whole Chronicles of Narnia is it's set in London during the war, and because London is being bombarded, all the air raids, these family, 4 children, are sent out to the countryside to a place where they know the family friend, and he's an elderly professor, eccentric, and he lives in this humongous house out in the country, far from everything, where they're not afraid of it being bombed on, and these 4 children go there, and they're exploring the house when it's raining, and the youngest go into a wardrobe. You know what a wardrobe is, right? It's like, we all usually have closets in our houses, but before, in the past, they didn't have closets. They had these huge, pieces of furniture that went from floor to the ceiling practically, and you would open them up and hang your coats up and stuff. They could be all different sizes. And so into this wardrobe, the youngest one goes to hide when they're playing hide and seek or exploring, and as she goes into the back to get deeper behind the coats, she's imagining that she's going to be well hidden, but as she goes, she doesn't feel the bag, even though it should be there. And as she continues on, she ends up in this snowy place in the land of Narnia, that is now being ruled by this, okay, I can't tell you the whole story, but by this evil white witch, and she's making it eternally, according to the book, eternally winter but never Christmas. That's the description of this terrible wintry place. Because some of us go, oh, winter, that's awesome. But it's never Christmas. So she comes back. She tells her brothers and older brothers and sisters about it, but none of them believe. They think she's kind of making it up for fun. But then they realize that she always tells the truth, that she insists that she's telling the truth. They go back to that wardrobe, they open it up, doesn't make any sense. They all go in, and it's just a plain wardrobe. Nobody believes her. And they're now the older siblings are wondering, is she under a lot of stress? She never lies. What's going on? Okay, now here's the point I'm trying to make about risk-taking, about faith. She insists, but now they're worried about her. She doesn't lie. So they're wondering, is she becoming emotionally distraught and unstable? So they go to the professor, elderly professor. They don't really want to trouble him, but they go and talk with him, and he's sitting there, certainly come on in, and can we tell you something? It's kind of a weird scenario, but here's what's going on with our youngest sibling. And they tell him the story. And his answer is unexpected. He said, is she prone to lying? I said, no, she never lies. Before this, we'd say she never lies. Okay, well, then she's not lying. Most likely, right? We can kind of rule that out. Is she crazy? And he says, just looking at her, I just know she's not. Just look at her eyes. And they're like, oh, okay, she's not crazy. And he says, well, that's logical, right? She's probably telling the truth. And they're all like, what do you mean? Because that's so unbelievable. It's so out of the ordinary. It's so unexpected. And I think this is C.S. Lewis's way of saying, how about you and your faith? It's staring you right in the face, but you're willing to come up with every other excuse rather than that. And so we don't step out in faith. We don't take a risk. We don't go forward in our life and just say, oh, all these excuses, all these common reasons, common sense reasons, everything that we can think of to not do. And then he mumbles under his breath. I remember this is classic. I don't remember exact words, but what the professor says about those older siblings is he says, what do they teach in school these days? No sense of logic. And they're kind of flabbergasted because they would think that he would say, well, obviously if she's not lying, and obviously that's a fantastic story, can't be true, therefore, she must be going a little batty, we need to go get some help. It's not what they're expecting. That's what they're expecting. But when he says, well, the most logical conclusion is she's telling the truth and there's something going on. And he says, I don't know, there's mysterious things that happen all the time. Men and women, I'm not trying to make you believe something based on a blind leap of faith, but if God exists and if He is working in this world, don't you think that beyond what we know in terms of scientific principles and just physical logic and physical laws and all these things, that God who created everything wouldn't make it much more infinite sense that He's going to do crazy, amazing things beyond what we anticipate, what we expect beyond the known? Can't He do that? Of course He can. And if you really do believe that, then when that happens, you have to understand that that is, as a Christian, as likely, if not more so, than some of the unlikely probabilities in this world. And so what I'm saying is, from this passage, I'm trying to reconvince us, especially those of us who profess to be Christians, to expect miraculous things. Why do we have to convince you to expect miraculous things? Why do we have to expect you that God will be God instead of Him operating only in the norm according to man, laws, man's discovered physical properties, all these things? It makes no sense whatsoever. What might we be missing out? What might we be missing out? And this is why the last statement that Jesus makes, let's just end with that this morning, is a chastisement of us all. I mean, when Jesus looks and sees Peter sinking and he says, Lord, save me, He reaches out, He saves him, He says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And I think that's so true for all of us. We profess, oh Lord, we profess, you've saved us. We profess that we're your disciples, we're your followers, we love you, we believe in you, we believe in heaven, we've been eternally saved by you, and yet we live out such little faith day by day. And it's not something we do instantly, but it's something maybe today that we can begin to decide. And as we continue looking at the book of John, as we continue looking at people having real life encounters with Jesus from 2,000 years ago, maybe we can begin to encounter him in a very real way in our lives. Here, today, this year, not next year, not in the future, but now. Let's begin.